So the first slide coming up this slide talks about the Pasadena Water and Power landscape rebates and programs that we offer. We have added a QR code to this screen, and this slide will be at the end of the presentation, just in case you aren't able to capture it, or if there's people still joining, they're able to have a chance to view this at the end of the presentation as well. So Pasadena Water and Power offers a robust amount of rebates and programs. We offer on-site landscape surveys with Tim Wheeler, who is joining us tonight, absolutely free. We're able to come to the home, and Tim can inspect and survey irrigation systems and recommend different landscapes based on your needs. So that is a wonderful program, and we have some opportunities at the end to talk further about that. There's also the turf rebate. We partner with the Metropolitan Water District, to do a turf replacement rebate. And recently, the rebate just went up to $3 per square foot. So it's just as long as the funds are available and for that increase. We also, along with the turf rebate, there's a new tree rebate. So with removing turf, anyone who plants a tree, up to 5 trees, will receive $500. And our website goes into all the guidelines, the different trees that qualify as well. Pasadena Water and Power exclusively offers a spray to drip program, which helps PWP water customers convert their sprinkler irrigation into drip irrigation. So we offer 2 drip kits per customer and up to 400 linear feet of the coil tubing to install your own drip irrigation system. We also offer rebates for irrigation controllers, efficient sprinklers such as rotating nozzles, rain barrels, and cisterns as well. So please visit pwpweb.com/savewater, or simply click on the QR code on the screen. And we'll turn it over to Tim.
Well, good evening, everybody. I guess this kind of gives a whole new definition to happy hour, right? We're going to talk landscapes. What this program is all about tonight is really kind of taking you through the steps of if you're interested in changing your landscape to make it more water efficient, or changing just part of your landscape to make it more water efficient. We outlined kind of the basic steps that you would go through, so you have an idea as to what the project is looking like. It starts by defining where you want to do your project. Are you looking at doing your entire yard, or the front yard, or the parkway, or just a section of your yard? We really encourage you to take advantage of the turf removal rebate and see about getting rid of some of your grass. Grass is a great surface if you have a purpose for it. If you have pets, if you have children, you need a place to play, or a surface that'll take wear and tear. Grass is good at that. But as far as using it as an ornamental ground cover, it just uses too much water. It uses about 50% more water than just about any other plant you would choose to put in your landscape. So by removing grass or limiting the amount of grass you have, you can really take a big step towards cutting down on the amount of water you're using in your landscape. And with that $3 a square foot rebate, it goes a long ways towards paying for a project like this. We encourage you to take steps to improve your soil. That's just going to benefit the plants in the long run, and we talk a little bit about that. The idea of incorporating rainwater capture, and that can be anything from installing a rain barrel or two to actually building a rain garden or a bioswale. And we'll talk about that. But Pasadena actually gets a fair amount of its total water supply from right under your feet. There's a healthy groundwater basin underneath the city of Pasadena. And the idea behind the rainwater capture is instead of rainwater, running off into the storm drains and ending up out in the ocean, trying to keep as much of that as we possibly can here in Pasadena, where we can recharge that groundwater basin. Uh, so you think, well, how much water can I capture? And one house, while helpful, isn't a huge amount. But if you think about you and all your neighbors, how much your neighborhood could capture in a rainstorm with just some small features, it becomes significant. The idea of modifying your irrigation. Uh, they mentioned the spray to drip, which is great if you have sprinklers now. It's a great way to go to a more conserving method of irrigation for the right plants, and we'll talk about that because not all plants are great candidates for drip. Uh, if you are currently hand watering and you like hand watering, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing that says you have to install an irrigation system. So keep that in mind. If you like uh, hand watering and drip are both exempt from any of the watering regulations. So if you like hand watering and you're having success with it, I encourage you to keep doing it because in my opinion, I think hand watering is the most efficient way to water because you can tailor the water to each individual plant, depending on the plant's water needs and its size. So I'm a big fan, and if you're currently doing it, don't feel that you have to install, an automatic sprinkler system. Uh, Choosing plants, we're going to talk a little bit about that process of, how do you decide what the right plants are, uh, and where should they be planted? How do you make sure you don't make a mistake that comes back in the future where, oh, geez, I wish I hadn't put that plant in that particular spot. And then we're going to talk a little bit about just the horticultural processes of installing plants and how to maintain them after you put them in. So that's in a nutshell what we're going to cover here tonight. Okay, Jessica. So defining your project. For a lot of people, that is a very difficult thing to do, is to decide how big a project do I really want. And I would encourage you, currently the rules on the rebate programs are that with the turf rebate, you can apply for it more than once. One time per year, I believe is how it's set up. So if you're not sure, start small. Start with just a portion of your yard. The parkway, the area between the street and the sidewalk that a lot of residents in Pasadena have, is a great place to start because you're going to learn a lot as you go through this process. And you may decide that on the next project, you want to do things differently than you're going to do it on this one. And that's okay. So think about that. Think about optimizing how much turf you can remove. Do you really use the turf in the front yard? For most people, the answer is no. It's just ornamental. The process is the same, no matter how big or small the project is. It's just the amount of work that you're going to have to do. Okay. So how do you decide? If you have an automatic sprinkler system, you're going to have a series of valves that turn on and off, and each valve is going to water a portion of your yard. We call those hydrozones. And So what we recommend is that you pick one or two of those zones, those hydrozones, those valves, and make that your project. Now, if you're hand watering, the sky's the limit. You can do as much or as little because you're not tied to a particular zone. And the reason we do this is because we want to make sure that when you put in your new plants, all the plants that you put in that particular area all have the same basic water requirement. Uh, and so you cannot mix, for instance, you can't do a zone that's partially grass and partially something else because the grass isn't compatible, especially if you go with something like the California natives. So look at, go out next time your sprinklers are running or run your sprinklers and look at the different zones or different areas that get watered every time a valve comes on, and try to use that to define the area for your landscape project. Again, typically, hopefully, your sprinkler system is set up so that, for instance, your grass is set up on its own irrigation valve or a series of valves, because that makes it very easy to define, okay, I'm going to take this area of lawn out and I'm going to replace it with something else. Okay. Why remove the turf grass? Well, I mentioned it already. It uses a lot of water, uh, and it's becoming unsustainable. And while you don't necessarily have to get rid of all your grass, as I mentioned, there are certain areas in your yard that might be perfect uh, as turf areas because they're an area that gets a lot of wear and tear. Uh, Think about the areas that you now have in grass that don't get any wear and tear, that don't get any use. They're basically just a green ground cover. Those are the ideal candidates. Okay. So how do you get rid of the grass? Well, your timing in taking this class tonight is actually perfect because what we recommend is a process called sheet mulching. Sheet mulching is organic. Uh, the only drawback to it is that it takes time. It can take 2 to 3, or actually 3 to 4 months to be effective. And the idea behind sheet mulching is putting down materials over the top of the plants you want to get rid of that will block the sunlight. And the reason we need to block the sunlight is because that's how the plants create their food. Despite what the fertilizer companies tell you, they don't eat your fertilizer. You're not really feeding plants when you put down fertilizer. The only thing they consume is sunlight. And so we need to block that sunlight so they can stop producing their food, which is carbohydrates. The reason it takes 3 to 4 months is plants are fabulous at storing those carbohydrates. And what we need to do is block the sunlight so they can't create any new food, but we need them to use up all the food they have stored. In addition to blocking that sunlight, we will use materials that, as the plant material dies, it will naturally compost and return into the soil and become nutrients for the new landscape. So you don't actually have to remove any materials. And this process works best in the summer months. So if you're considering on doing a landscape project, if you were to, apply to the rebate programs now, get approved, jump in and start your sheet mulching process, as soon as you can, you'll have the entire warm summer months for it to take effect. And it's too hot to be out doing a lot of heavy landscaping anyway, which lines you up perfectly for the fall, which is the best time to plant your new landscape anyway. So the timing on this all works out really well. The one thing I will say about sheet mulching is it's not 100%. You can expect to get good control, but it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to deal probably with some regrowth, especially if you have some of the tougher grasses like common Bermuda and things like that. They can be hard to get rid of. So expect that you're going to see some regrowth. Okay. So what do you do with all those Amazon boxes you get? Now you have a purpose. What they work great for this. The thing you want to do is remove any staples, tape, things like that, things that aren't going to break down from them. The good news is most of the cardboard now is printed with a soy-based ink, so it's actually biodegradable also. And what you do is you put a layer of these down over the in this case turf that you want to get rid of. If by some chance you don't have a good source of cardboard, you can always get the heavy construction paper. They sell it in rolls at places like Home Depot, and it works fine also. The process is any grass you have, you're going to mow it very short, and you're going to water it. Then you're going to put down a layer of cardboard. Now I have listed there 10 layers of newspaper, but we really most people don't get newspaper anymore, so it's probably harder to get than the cardboard or the brown paper. I don't particularly like newspaper because it's lightweight, which is why you would need at least 10 layers of it, and it blows easily. So if you happen to be out trying to put this down and the breeze comes up, you may spread your newspaper throughout the neighborhood, which is not fun. So I really recommend going with heavy cardboard or the construction paper. Remember, we're trying to block out all sunlight, so you're going to overlap the edges. Then once you get all the cardboard down, wet it thoroughly and begin to apply a layer of wood chips or mulch over the top. The reason we like the wood chips or the mulch is that because it does not have to be removed. It's going to become part of the natural composting process that you're doing. It's actually going to help push the process along. And when you get done and you're ready to plant your new plants, all you have to do is pull back the mulch that's there. Any cardboard that might be left, you can easily cut with, like a shovel, and put your new plants in the ground. The key to this process working is you do have to moisten it occasionally through the summer. Probably once every couple weeks, depending on how hot and dry it is. You need to keep the moisture level in the mulch adequate so that the organisms that actually do the composting, that actually do the breaking down of not only the plant material you're trying to get rid of, but the cardboard and the mulch that you put on top, they need that moisture in order to live and function. So it's really important that you do that. Don't just put the wood chips on top and then walk away for 3 months, because you come back in the fall and the process will not have been as successful as it should be. Again, the beauty is it doesn't have to be removed when the process is finished. Next. Now, I mentioned that you can expect some regrowth. And so you may need to use something like an organic herbicide to control the plant material that isn't taken care of in the mulching process. Organic herbicides usually are vinegar based, which is acetic acid, or citric acid based, like from lemons and limes. It is not as effective as some of the chemical herbicides that you can buy, but it is organic. And so there is no residue. And the way they work is that acid strips the waxy layer off the plant. The plants are actually covered in a waxy layer called a cuticle, and that's what holds the water in. So when you strip that layer off, in this case, we're using acid to strip it off, the plants lose control over their water and they dry out. The problem, or I guess the challenge with the organic herbicide is it only works on the part of the plant that it touches. So while the top may dry out, turn brown and die, you still have an actively growing root system. And that root system, again, with lots of stored carbohydrates, is going to try to regrow the plant, which means you're going to have to make multiple applications, most likely. This is going to work best on the small plants, new growth on plants. So be vigilant. If you're trying to get rid of plants and you do, the composting process, as soon as you start to see any kind of new growth, start using your herbicide, because they'll be much more effective than if you wait and let the plant get bigger and harden off. Okay, next slide. So we mentioned, well, at this point, we've talked about how to define where you're going to do your project and how big your project is going to be, how to get rid of the grass or the ground cover that's currently there, using the mulching process, so that we're ready to hit that planting window that we want to hit in the fall. When it comes time to think about planting, one of the things that you want to be doing or thinking about is how can you build better soil structure. Our urban soils, unfortunately, are quite poor because we have developed this habit, and I blame it on the backpack blowers that almost all the gardeners use, of we keep our landscapes sterile. Any wood material, any leaves, anything that falls into the landscape week to week, we blow it off, pick it up, put it in the green waste, and send it away. And what we're doing is we're really stripping off all of the natural materials that would be returning back into the soil to build up the soil nutrients and to provide for the beneficial soil organisms. In nature, it's called nutrient cycling. And that's where you have these plants and the material falls off the plant. It falls into the root zone of the plant where it naturally decomposes and goes back into the soil, and it becomes the nutrients for the plant growth. It's an ongoing cycle. And we interrupt that when we keep our landscapes way too clean. So I'm actually going to encourage you to start thinking a little dirty, a little bit more about leaving some of that material behind so that it can begin to break down, return into the soil, and build up your soil. Not only is it good for soil nutrition, it helps retain water. Organic matter in our soil can act like a sponge. So a soil high in organic material can actually hold more water than a soil that does not have that. It improves soil structure. It helps reduce soil compaction, which is very detrimental to plants. When there's a lot of heavy compaction in the soil, you drive out the soil's ability to hold water, to hold air. It makes it difficult for the plants to root. And so what we want to do is we want to relieve as much of that compaction as possible so that water can penetrate our soils, air can penetrate our soils, the plants can root out better. And organic material helps do that. And it helps with nutrients. If you allow the soil to get into this cycle and you help it along by applying mulch and compost, you will find that your plants don't need chemical fertilizers. If you're currently using chemical fertilizers, you can probably wean yourself off of those. Down at the bottom of the page there, I put in the nitrogen cycle. And the reason I did that is because it shows what happens to organic materials, leaves, twigs, branches, things like that that fall into the soil. It's broken down by organisms in the soil. And it goes from organic nitrogen, it turns to ammonia. Yep, the same kind of ammonia you use for cleaning. The ammonia is then converted into nitrite by organisms, and then finally into nitrate. And the important thing about this is the only type of nitrogen that a plant can actually use is nitrate. Everything else has to be converted. And so the healthier your soil is, the better this process works naturally. And you begin to provide the nitrate that the plants need through this natural process by using organisms in the soil. And you don't need to put down, products like calcium nitrate or other, chemical fertilizers. Next slide. So we've improved our soil. Now we're starting to think about design. And this is where we get into that rainwater capture that I talked about, the groundwater recharge, trying to keep as much water in Pasadena as we possibly can, putting it into that basin so that it can be pumped out and used again by you. The water that can't be supplied naturally under the city of Pasadena has to be imported. And when you hear about water being brought in from Northern California or from the Colorado River, that is water that has to be brought in to supplement the natural groundwater. There isn't enough groundwater under Pasadena, but everything we can do to put water back into the ground is going to improve that situation and make the city less reliant on bringing water in from the outside. And from a design point of view, rainwater capture can be quite attractive, and it also creates opportunity for wildlife. So in this picture I'm showing you, it's a very small, what we call bioswale, a deep area in the lawn with a small depression that runs to it, where you could route your rain gutters, maybe off the front of the house into that area, and capture, instead of that water just running off on the sidewalk or down the driveway, now you're capturing it on your property and giving it a place to kind of puddle, for lack of a better term, and then slowly move into the ground. And that's good all the way around. It's good for the landscape, and it's good for the water supply. Okay. This is a much more elaborate design. If you're looking for ideas on this, would probably be considered more of a rain garden. So if you're looking for ideas on how to do this kind of landscaping, if you were to do a web search for rain garden, you'd see lots and lots of ideas. We call that a dry creek bed, but it's only dry when there aren't storms. It's there and it actually serves a purpose. It's a catchment for water coming off of the house and other places in the property. And so not only does it serve a function as a place to capture water on your landscape, but it can also be quite aesthetically pleasing, depending on the plants you choose and how you do your design. So it is something to think about, and some type of rainwater capture is required for the turf removal rebate. And again, that can be anything from a rain barrel. And rain barrels are great, especially if you have potted plants. I think that's the best use of rain barrels is for any of your indoor plants and potted plants. You're capturing that rainwater, and then you don't have to use the hose for that. Typically, you're not capturing a huge amount of water, so it's not like you're going to be able to rely on it to water your entire landscape, but it does make an excellent supplemental source. And then also in here, you see we're using the rocks to slow the water down, take the energy out of it so that it ponds in that area and doesn't create any kind of erosion. Okay. So let's talk about irrigation. And we're going to sort of breeze over irrigation because PWP on their website has some really great resources. Much like this class is being recorded so people can watch it in the future, we have done that with other classes on the spray to drip program, on how to re-nozzle an irrigation head. So there's a lot of really good resources that are already on their website. And so we're just going to brush over them so you're familiar with kind of the principles and the technology. And then at the end of the class, if we have time, we can circle back to irrigation if you guys are interested and want some more information. So the basic principle, most people don't water correctly. And even if you're not in a position right now of making any major changes to your landscape, just by changing how you water, you can probably save how much you're irrigating. The idea behind watering is to kind of replicate nature. And that means when you want to water deeply, but infrequently. Somehow, somewhere along the lines, we got into this idea that you're going to water every single day, but just for a little while. You know, I only water for a minute a station or 2 minutes a station. But they do it every single day. And the problem with that is plants are not genetically programmed to be watered that way. Now, there are certain plants like grass that won't complain. They will take water like that and be fine. It's not the way they grow in nature, but it isn't going to hurt them. Plants like California natives, that's a sure recipe for disaster. Because when you water, very often, you're keeping the top layer of the soil moist. And the roots of the plant are going to grow where? Well, they're going to grow where the moisture is. So what you're going to do is develop plants that have shallow roots, surface roots. By watering deeply and watering infrequently, what you're doing is you are actually triggering that plant's natural response to survival. And it actually will create a situation where that plant is going to want to develop more deeper roots. And that's the key to drought tolerance. The way that the watering ordinances are now, if you're following the ordinance, you kind of have to water deeply but infrequently, because at the current time, you're only allowed to water, I believe, 2 days a week. Is that correct? Yeah, 2 days a week. So, and your plants may be going through transition, getting used to that. But in the end, it's for the best. You're going to actually end up with healthier plants by changing that watering practice to that. Put the water where you want it. Water does not move in the soil side to side very well. Up and down, yeah, gravity helps us there, but side to side, not really. So, and this is very important if you're putting in drip irrigation. You have to make sure that if you're putting in drip, you put those emitters where the water's coming out right by where the plant is, because it's not going to move sideways. And especially if you're putting in a new landscape where you have small root balls on the plants, there's a good chance the plant might perish before it ever develops the roots to reach out over to where that water is. And the last one, apply water only as fast as the soil can absorb it. And this is about stopping runoff. Water running off your property from your irrigation system, it's just a waste. It's a waste of water and it's a waste of money. Uh, and there's really no need for it, because what we're going to talk about are some technologies where you can slow down how fast you put the water on, that allows the soil to absorb what you're putting on before it runs off. Again, if you have a newer irrigation controller, or you go to the city and apply for their controller program where you can get money towards a new controller, most of those controllers have the ability to change the watering pattern so that you can eliminate the runoff. Uh, in most cases, it's called a repeat cycle or a cycle and soak, something like that. But instead of your sprinklers coming on like they might now come on and run for 12 minutes, where you can have water running off, especially if you have slopes or a lot of clay, it'll break that 12 minutes down into shorter watering cycles. So it puts on an application of water, it stops, it allows that water to soak in, and then it puts on another application of water. So even without changing your irrigation technology per se, other than the controller, you can change how you water to eliminate the runoff. The last thing to know about water is when you're watering plants, you don't have to water the entire root zone per se. What you're aiming for is wetting about 50%. That's all you really need to do, which is why, for instance, when we put drip in, we put an emitter, one on each side of the plant, typically east and west or north and south, but we don't worry about having to wet the entire area around the plant. The plants will adjust that root zone as they grow and mature. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about putting in your irrigation system. You do want to water at least 50%, but don't worry about trying to get it up to 100. Okay. A couple examples of watering technology that one is the drip irrigation, where you see on those plants where you have that line laid on top of the ground, and then at each plant you'll have one or maybe two different irrigation, we call them emitters. It's just places where the water's coming out. And the other is the rotating nozzle. And although it is spray, the rotating nozzle, the magic behind that is that it greatly slows down, by about 20-25% how fast it's putting the water out. So again, you allow the soil time to absorb the water without getting the runoff by going to the new technology. In addition to putting the water down slower, they also have very adjustable patterns, which means you can tailor how the pattern that sprinkler is spraying, again, to avoid throwing water onto the sidewalk or the driveway or places like that where you don't want it. Okay. So how do you decide how you want to water? Are you going to go with overhead spray? Are you going to go with drip? Typically, the overhead spray is used for ground covers. It's most effective for ground covers. Ground covers can be hard to water with drip, and drip can be very hard to maintain underneath ground covers. Our traditional overhead spray, when we measure the water coming out of each sprinkler head, we measure it in gallons per minute. And this is the big difference between drip and overhead spray, and the main reason you cannot mix the two on the same zone. Remember, we talked about zones earlier, and in addition to making sure all the plants in a particular zone have the same basic water requirement, we need to make sure that the irrigation system in that zone is one type or another, because you really shouldn't mix overhead spray with drip, because overhead spray, we measure the water in gallons per minute. With drip, we measure the water in gallons per hour. So a typical spray head is typically about a half a gallon a minute, like you would have on your lawn. So each one of those head pops up and they put out about a half a gallon of water, every minute that they're on. With the drip irrigation, like we saw in the previous picture, you choose the emitter size depending on the plant size you're going to have. It can be a half a gallon per hour. It can be 1 gallon per hour. It can be 2 gallons per hour. And it puts the water out. Each emitter will put out that amount. So you really can't mix those two on the same zone. The drip works great for individual plants as opposed to the ground covers. It puts water down slow enough so that there's practically no runoff, even on slopes. If you are putting drip on slopes, put the drip emitter on the uphill side of the plant so that gravity will take the water to the root ball of the plant, not away from it. The big trade-off here is you're getting great efficiency with drip, but you also have a lot more maintenance with drip. So you do have to monitor your drip systems and maintain your drip systems because they are much more susceptible to plugging up and stopping working than the spray. Okay. So Kristen mentioned the spray to drip conversion kits that the city is giving out. And again, if you're thinking about doing this, you need to do an entire zone, not just part of a zone, because you can't mix existing spray heads with this. The beauty of this conversion kit, and there's at least one, if not more, videos on the process of actually doing this on the PWP website. So we go in great detail how to go through doing this. But the beauty of it is your existing spray heads can stay in the ground. And what we do is we just cap them off. As opposed to having a hole on top where the sprinkler head would pop up, you just unscrew that, screw a cap on, and it blanks that head off. And then on one or two heads, depending on the size of the zone, you can actually install the kit that is given to you that will turn an existing spray head, pop-up spray head, into a point of water source for drip. And inside that spray head, there's a strainer, which you need to have for drip. And there's also a pressure regulator, which drops your pressure down, which is something you also need to do for drip. So the kit that PWP has put together contains all the components that you need for converting an existing pop-up spray area to a drip. And it really works great. It's really slick and absolute minimum labor. Okay. So depending on the plants you want to use, and this is where you have to kind of make a decision ahead of deciding how you want to water, is what types of plants are you putting in? We have found that if you want to use California natives, that they actually respond better to the overhead high efficiency spray nozzles than to the point drip irrigation. They prefer a more even soil moisture that you get with the pop-up spray, as opposed to concentrating water in their root zone. It's almost too much of a good thing with having drip on California natives. I'm not going to say you can't do it. It's not a rule that you can't use drip on California natives, but the success rate with the plants really seems to drop. Now, having said that, I think if you're going to go with California natives, you should really revisit the idea of hand watering. because, like I said earlier, you can tailor the water to each individual plant, how often it gets watered and how much water it gets. If you are going to use an automatic sprinkler system, for the really drought tolerant plants like the natives, you are probably going to want to consider just upgrading the nozzles on your existing spray system. And there's also a rebate program for that. You can get some money to help pay for new nozzles to retrofit your spray heads. That's another program that's currently being offered. Okay. So here we go, high efficiency nozzles. When we talk about nozzles, what we are talking about is literally just the part of the sprinkler head where the water is coming out. And that can be changed. And there's been huge advances in the spray technology as far as efficiency, and it's a viable option. I would recommend it for areas where you're doing ground covers, and I would recommend it for, say, the California natives. Where it doesn't really make sense is if you're putting in individual plants in your landscape and they're going to be fairly spaced apart. Because remember, if you're using spray, you're putting water across the entire soil area. And if you don't have plants utilizing that water, then it's really wasted water, even if it's not running off. The other thing it's going to do, though, is it's going to create great conditions for weeds. The best way to control weeds in the landscape is to be very specific about how you apply your water, and making sure you control sunlight getting to the soil, i.e. using a thick layer of mulch. So if you're using spray like this and you're wetting the entire soil area, even if there aren't plants there, there's a good chance that you're going to have issues with weeds. So it's something to consider, and that's one of the reasons not to use this. But like I said, there is a program for rebates or getting money towards this new nozzle technology. You have to be pretty careful about knowing what kind of sprinkler heads you currently have, because not every single sprinkler head can take this new nozzle technology. For instance, the old style brass, we used to call them champion heads or lawn life heads, but the old technology pop-up heads that were using grass a lot, those heads have to be completely changed out. You cannot just change the nozzle on those. But any of the newer heads, any heads that have probably been installed in the last, say 20 years, Rainbird, Toro, any of the big brands like that, you can get this new nozzle technology for those kinds of heads. Okay. So I mentioned this earlier, but they reduce runoff. They have really adjustable patterns, both in how far they throw and the arc that they throw in. Although we don't want to water in the wind, sometimes it happens, and these new nozzles work much better if there is a breeze. They don't mist as much as the current technology. And remember, that misted water is just wasted water. It's not doing the plant any good. In order for the water that you put on the landscape to help the plant, it has to go to the roots. Just wetting the foliage, while it may cool the plant down a little bit in the heat of the summer, it's really not doing anything to meet the plant's water needs. So we want to avoid misting. Something to look for if you are going to be changing out your nozzles. You want to make sure that the new nozzles you put in have We call it VAN, variable arc. And what that does is that allows you pretty much adjust the sprinkler head anywhere from 1 degree to 365 degrees. So if you have curves in your yard, you have different arcs, which are very common in landscapes, you can adjust the heads to meet those. So instead of getting stuck where you can only throw in half a circle or 45 degrees of a circle or a full circle, now you can adjust just how much of that circle you water. Uh, and it's a van nozzle. If you're looking to upgrade your irrigation technology, in Pasadena, there are a couple of really good sources. You've got Landscape Warehouse and you've got J. Harold Mitchell. If you want to drive a little bit, in Burbank, there's a place called Hydroscapes. Those are all basically commercial irrigation supply houses, but they sell to the general public. The advantage there is the people working there tend to have more knowledge than what you might find at the big box stores, and a much greater range of product. So just something to think about. Just something to think about. Okay. All right, here we go. Here's our first break for questions. If you've got questions on anything we've talked about so far, here's your chance. Ask them in the chat box, and we'll address them. Nothing? I'm not that good.
Yeah, Tim, I don't see any questions in the chat. We've been answering questions as we go
Okay.
along through the presentation.
All right.
So if
Well,
nobody has any additional questions, we will have time at the end as well. But it looks like we're okay to proceed.
good. Excellent. All right. All right. Well, we'll forge ahead then. So we've defined our project, where we're going to put it. We've talked about getting rid of the grass and the plant material that's already there. We've talked about improving our soil, rainwater capture, and touched on irrigation systems. So now let's talk about choosing plants. How do you decide what plants to use? And this is absolutely the most personal question you'll ever be asked about a landscape. There has been a big trend towards California natives, and rightfully so. They are they're adapted to where we are living. What I would say is make sure you really research your natives before you make your choice. There are some questions you should ask. The California natives this year are absolutely spectacular. They've had 2 normal winters with normal rainfall in a row, and they are just absolutely beautiful. Keep in mind that in drought years, they might not look so nice. The other thing is right now, the California natives are absolutely putting on a show. This is their time of the year, the springtime. Come August, September, October, they don't necessarily look as nice. So just make sure that you understand what that plant is going to look like in other times of the year. You fall in love with it now while it looks its best. But keep in mind that it does have its seasons, and at other times of the year, it might not look as nice. So if you're thinking about plant material, are you a purist where you absolutely want to stay with just California natives, or are regional plants acceptable to you? Are plants that are native to Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Mexico, are those acceptable to you? Because it changes the plant palette. The most important thing about the kinds of plants you use is making sure that the zone that you put them in, they all have about the same water requirement if you're using sprinklers. If you're going to hand water, that rule kind of goes out the window because you can mix plants and take care of them individually with your hand watering. Uh, Are you open to plants from other parts of the world? There are a lot of fantastic drought tolerant plants that are very well adapted to Southern California, but they originate in the Mediterranean area, or they come from South Africa or other places on the planet that have a similar climate. There is nothing wrong with using those kinds of plants. It's a personal decision. And this is part of what you will probably spend the hottest parts of the summer doing while you're, sheet mulching the grass away, and there's not a lot you can do in the yard. Now is the time to really look into and investigate the plants that you want to put in. Keep in mind also with California natives that not every single California native is native to every single part of California. There are stream bed natives that are relatively high water using plants. And there are desert natives that are incredibly durable. We've got plants that are native to the Mojave Desert out near, state line that take about as bad a conditions as can exist. So again, it's part of your research, making decisions on what kinds of, if you're going to go with natives, what kinds of natives you want to use. The other thing to keep in mind is availability. When you start looking at California natives, you might actually fall in love with some plants that aren't being commercially cultivated. So they're not available to you. So that becomes part of the process. Where can you buy the plants that you want? I would offer you a hint that if you do want to do California natives, and I think we have a link at the end of the presentation, but the California Native Plant Society has an absolutely fantastic website of natives with a database of information on them that will be very helpful in you narrowing down the plants that you like and where you can use them. Natives tend to be very choosy, finicky, dare I say, about the soil that they grow in, how much sunlight they receive, when and how much water they get, what their nutritional requirements are. So you're going to have to educate yourself a little bit. This kind of circles back around to why turf grass has always been so popular, is because it's easy. You don't really have to worry about any of this stuff with grass. You put it down, you give it some water, a little fertilizer every now and again, and it does well. When you start getting into some of these other plants, they can be a bit of a challenge to you. And so that's something to keep in mind. How much challenge do you want in your landscape? Something else to think about, especially with the natives, is understanding how big some of these plants actually get. When we bring them home from the nursery in their little 1 gallon or 5 gallon containers, they're awful cute. But we put them in the ground, and in a couple of years, they become this monstrosity. And one of the things about natives is they don't particularly like pruning. So the idea that you put a plant in the ground and it's going to get too big, but you're thinking, well, I'll just go out every now and again and I'll just prune it back, doesn't really work with these plants, because they don't handle pruning like that very well. So make sure you understand how big your plants are going to get when they're mature, and choose accordingly. Here, I would recommend actually, when you're doing your search on where you can find some of these plants, is go out and talk to some of the nurseries and see what they have to say. What plants are doing well in Pasadena that they know of? What plants are they selling and having, no problems with? Um, Talk to them and find out, because they can point you in the right direction in a lot of cases. They can also help you with questions about roots or size at maturity and things like that. Uh, Also ask them about their plant guarantee. If they do have a plant guarantee on things like the natives. Okay. So I'm just going to go through some examples. These are just sort of random examples that I picked. They are all California natives to kind of give you an idea uh, as to how they look, how big they get. These tend to be on the smaller side. I didn't choose any of the larger shrubs or trees. Uh, and these are plants that are pretty readily available. You can find it at most nurseries, and they're not super difficult to grow as far as the natives go. And so here's heuchera or coral bells. It gets to be 12 to 18 inches with the flower stalk. Uh, Almost all of these plants, maybe a couple at the end, but almost all of these plants appreciate a little bit of afternoon shade if you can give it to them. If they're in full brutal sun on the west side or the south side of the house, they just might not look as well as they could if they had a little bit of afternoon shade. So it becomes more of an aesthetic thing than a survival thing. Next slide. The sages. Again, this is one of those where you're going to have to ask yourself, how big of a purist are you going to be? Because there are over 900 species of sage. There are many, many, many different sages to choose from. It's a great plant. I love it. If you like hummingbirds and butterflies, this is a great plant for a hummingbird and butterfly garden. You can get them in lots of different colors, lots of different textures, different scent. Some are very strongly scented with the sage, the classic sage scent, and others not so much. Drought tolerant. Uh, they like decent drainage or control over the water. So these don't like to be planted in spots that are wet. And this is one that will take full sun. Matter of fact, if you give it too much shade, it'll actually stretch. It'll actually start getting kind of leggy on you. A little bit of afternoon shade, not a problem, but too much shade can be a bit of an issue. So look into the sages. And again, you have to kind of decide how much of a purist you're going to be because there's a lot of absolutely stunning sages that come out of Mexico. And the way I look at it is that borders are kind of a political thing that plants don't really understand. So, if you see something that comes from Baja, Mexico, it's up to you, but I don't know that I would rule that out as something you could use in a California natives garden. Just my personal take on it. Okay, next slide. Penstemon. This is one of those desert plants. Great for hummingbirds and butterflies. This will take some shade without a problem, but it'll also take full sun. Beautiful flowers. You'll see a lot of these in bloom right now. It's another great plant, and it works well with the two that I've shown you so far. I mean, all of these could be used together. Okay. Achillea, here's another one, really popular. You see a lot of this now. Typically, the ones you're seeing now have kind of a sulfur yellow flower. You can get them in other colors. That's just the most common one. The easiest to get is the yellow flower. widespread as far as the areas it grows in. It's nice because it's got a very fine foliage. If you're looking for a plant with a fine foliage, this is great for that. Uh, it can almost be too much of a good thing because this plant will spread. It'll spread underground with runners. So works great in parkways. That's the place where I've really seen it used with a lot of success, is in parkways where it's kind of captured on both sides. You got typically a sidewalk on one side and a curb on the other. So it can't really escape too much. Um, and it tolerates the heat coming off the street and everything else. It doesn't get too tall. Keep in mind with parkways, if you're going to do a parkway, the plants that you choose to go in there should stay below about 24 inches. The city actually has some parkway regulations about that. They don't want real tall plants in the parkway that are going to block the view of people pulling in and out of driveways and things like that. Also on the PWP website, we have done a few parkway designs to kind of give you an idea, some inspiration on things that you can do, ways you can redo a parkway if you remove the turf. But this is a plant that would be good there that you should consider. Okay. Okay. Don't get caught up in the common name of this, Oregon grape. It's a Pacific coast plant, so it does all along the coast of California up into Oregon. This is a shade plant, and I think that's important because a lot of people think, well, California natives need all sun, and most of them do appreciate a lot of sun, but this is one that works really well under other plants. So if you've got mature trees, especially if you have like oaks, this is a great plant to go underneath. It's a vertical grower. It doesn't spread side to side a whole lot. It grows up. Got absolutely stunning yellow flowers, and it looks a little bit like a holly. It's got the leaves that are a lot like a holly. So this is one to consider as what we would call an understory plant. A plant where maybe you have a problem growing other plants because it's too shady. This might be a really good choice for that. Okay. And if you are thinking about a butterfly garden, this is a must-have. It's California milkweed. Now, I will tell you that it's not the most stunning plant in the world as far as aesthetics. But if your goal is to attract butterflies, this plant fits the bill. Not only is it a good plant for a food source for the larva, but it's also a plant that provides nectar for the adult. So in a case of a plant like this that's maybe you don't find super aesthetically pleasing, this is a good one to hide behind something else. The butterflies will find it. But if you're really serious about attracting, butterflies to your and hummingbirds to your garden, I would consider having both milkweed and some kind of sage. That combination is very effective. It does go summer dormant, so sometimes the plants they don't look so hot in the summertime. Keep that in mind. Another reason to maybe put it behind something else. That's kind of common for most of the natives. They'll go semi-dormant or dormant, which means they basically kind of go to sleep, which is why summertime watering for natives can be so devastating because they're not using any water and the roots just sit there in the moist soil and they're not adapted to that and they rot. So what we do with our natives, what we like to do is once or twice during the hot summer months, if we don't get natural monsoon moisture, in the last few years we've had some pretty good storms come up out of Mexico in the summer months and give us a couple nice showers during the summer. If we don't get that natural monsoon moisture, go ahead and create it for your natives by watering them maybe just once a month in August and September, to provide some soil moisture, just enough moisture in the soil to keep it from completely drying out. And you will find the plants really respond well to that. They can take that kind of water. What they don't do well with is a soil that stays wet all the time. Okay. This is another one that takes all kinds of conditions. This one actually will go semi-deciduous, which means in the summer months, not only does it go dormant, but it'll actually drop some of its leaves and things. And this is where knowing your plants really helps, because most people see a plant that's starting to turn brown and drop its leaves and they think, uh-oh, it needs water. And it's just the opposite with this plant. Absolutely just the opposite. That summer water will do more harm than good. So again, pretty flowers, appreciates a little bit of shade if you have it. This is where actually, depending on your lot and what you currently have, the city of Pasadena is blessed in that so many of the properties are older properties and they have mature trees. So finding areas where you have some summertime shade, afternoon shade is not hard to do. But if by some chance you don't have what you consider adequate shade on your property, take advantage of that shade tree program and put in one or two nice shade trees. Now, keep in mind, it's going to be a couple years before they actually start providing any kind of decent shade. So if you're putting in plants that need a little bit of afternoon shade, they're going to suffer until those trees mature a little bit. But in the long game, in the long run, they'll work very well together. Okay.
Hey, Tim.
Okay. Yeah.
Excuse me, Tim. We have a question in the chat box. Do you have any tips on hand watering California natives?
Yes. Water deeply, water infrequently. Actually, if they're newer plants, and we'll show you this in a couple slides, but putting a basin around the base of the plant so that when you water it, you can put water in that basin and it captures the water above the root zone. That's how we get the deep water we're talking about without having runoff. California, any plant, but even the California natives, we have a kind of a rule of thumb of 2 summers for establishment. So if you're putting in a new landscape, expect that you're going to have to baby these plants and probably water them a little more in the first 2 summers than you are going to have to after that once they become established. So some of these rules that I'm giving you are for established plant material, meaning it's been in the ground for at least 2 years. You're going to have to break those rules a little bit in the first couple years and take a little bit extra care with them to get them established. But once you do, you really begin to see how drought tolerant they can be. Again, if you're hand watering, that knowing your plants and being able to tailor the amount of water to each plant based on what it needs is important. And by that is not so much how much, because anytime you water a plant, no matter what it is, you want to deep water it. It's just how often are you going to do that? We have found, just kind of through me interacting with people that are growing natives in Pasadena, that once the plants have been in the ground a couple years, once every 10 days seems to be the sweet spot. I'd say if they've only been in one summer or 2 summers, you might be at once every 5 to 7 days. Once you get through those first 2 summers, Typically, you can get out to about once every 10 days on them. And that's really to keep them aesthetically pleasing. They can survive on less water than that, but again, they go into survival mode. And when they're in survival mode, aesthetics kind of goes out the window. So, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, once you had if you had natives in the ground that had been in for 5 years or longer, if you weren't watering, maybe just once or twice a month. The longer they're in, the more established they become, the less you have to worry about the watering. I hope that answers your questions. If it didn't, let me know. Okay, so we've thought about what plants we want to use. Now we have to make them work in our landscape, the landscape design. And this is where a lot of people really get hung up. They get so intimidated by this. And all I can say is don't let it be. Go with your gut instinct. Worst case scenario is that you end up moving a plant or replacing a plant. You know, you put something in, you don't like it, take it out. You put a plant in and it turns out it's not going to be in the right spot. Either move it or remove it and put something else in there. You know, don't let this be what stops you from doing this. The most important thing is understanding how big the plant is going to get when it's mature. And this is the biggest mistake I see people make, is they either didn't know plants were going to get as big as they get. And this is true of a lot of the California natives, like the lemonade berry and the coffee berry. And, you know, they get to be huge shrubs. And people don't realize that when they put them in their yards. So really understand that. And when you're doing your research, that's one of the most important things to know is how big is this thing going to get? How tall it's going to get? How wide is it going to spread? And you'll notice that I tried to give you that information on those plants that we just went through. And there's a reason for that. The other thing, when you start looking at where you're going to put the plants in your yard, go out into your yard and look up. You're looking for wires, you know, telephone wires, cables, anything that plant is going to grow into, because you don't want that. You don't want something that's going to get big enough to grow up and become an issue with whatever is overhead. But also look down. You know, so many of our utilities are buried nowadays. Your water line, your gas line, possibly your cable, maybe your electrical. So understand what's down below your feet also, because the last thing you want to do is put a plant in right over the top of a water line that's going to, or a sewer line that's going to become a problem in the future. So that's really critical, not so much when you first put your landscape in, but years down the road. What's the desired effect? One of my pet peeves with landscaping nowadays is there's just way too many plants. And it's easy to fall into this trap, because if you're putting in plants that are going to spread 5 feet, each plant is going to spread 5 feet. You know, the closest you should put those plants together is 10 feet, because they're each going to grow 5 feet. Or I should say, they're going to go kind of 2.5 feet off of the center. So you wouldn't want to put them any closer than 5 feet together. But that can look pretty barren. You know, a lot of people, if you put a landscape in that looks like that, where you've spaced everything out, you might be surprised at, one, how few plants you can actually fit in your yard, and two, how barren it looks when you finish this project. It can be very disappointing. That's one of the reasons why commercially, and if you have someone do a landscape for you, oftentimes they will overplant. They'll actually put too many plants in, because they want to have an effect. When they walk up to the door to get their paycheck for their project, they want you to look out and say, oh, wow, that really looks great. You know, what they're not telling you is what it's going to look like 3 years from now or 5 years from now. Commercially, we do that consciously. We finish building a building. We want the landscape to look like it's somewhat established, so we'll way overplant. And the idea being, well, 5 years from now, we'll come in and we'll take out every other shrub, or we'll thin the plant material out. But how often do you think that really happens? Virtually never. And so you end up with these landscapes again that are way overplanted, way too many plants. The plants are competing with each other for water, for nutrients, for light, and it becomes a huge amount of work trying to maintain that. And that's the other thing, maintenance. Give yourself room to get in amongst your plants, especially if you're using drip. Remember, the drip's going to require a lot of maintenance. So give yourself room to get in there and work, especially if you're going to go with cacti and succulents and things that have stickers and thorns. You crowd those plants together, you're not going to be able to get in there comfortably anyway to do maintenance. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Where we kind of break this rule is if we're doing erosion control, where we need to, get stuff in, get it established, and get it to start filling in before the next rainy season. Oftentimes we will overplant, but we're doing it for good reason there. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the only reason to ever do it, and unless you're willing to put in plants now and take them out later when the landscape starts to mature and grow together. The last thing is, and I mentioned pots and containers earlier with the rain barrels, because I think that that's a great use of the water from the rain barrels. But pots and containers are also a great way to grow hard to grow plants, problematic plants, plants that need very specific growing conditions, like a specific kind of soil or a specific location. Don't cross those plants off your list as, gosh, I really wish I could grow that, but I don't have the right soil for it, or I don't have the right place for it. Consider growing it in a pot where you can move it as it needs to be moved, and you can control what kind of soil it's growing in, and you can, customize the watering schedule for it. So don't let hard to grow plants be a deal breaker for you. Just go about it differently. Instead of trying to incorporate those types of plants directly into the ground in your landscape, do them separately. Okay.
Tim,
So,
quick question from one
yes.
of the chat. The question was whether the city assists with eliminating gophers that are destroying grass and plants. And the city does not have a specific program to assist with eliminating gophers, but I know that there's some plants that are disliked by them. And I thought I'd ask you this question to see if you have any insight as to what might help.
Yeah, kind of the classic plant we use, and it's actually a pretty plant, extremely drought tolerant, is society garlic. Now, like the name says, it has the word garlic in it, and that's because this plant smells like garlic. So if you don't mind the smell of garlic in your landscape, society garlic can be a very effective way of keeping gophers and ground squirrels. I'm not going to say they'll never come into your yard, but they're going to be much less likely. They'll probably go to the neighbor's yard that doesn't smell so heavily of garlic. This plant will actually make the soil smell like garlic through the root system, and that's the part that the rodents don't like. It's really a pretty plant, and it's something that I think is a great candidate for any landscape. I mean, even if you're doing natives, you could incorporate it for the purpose of rodent control. It comes in green. There's a variegated version, has a beautiful purple flower. So that's kind of the classic plant that we talk about for that. There are others, but they're marginal. Gophers and ground squirrels, unfortunately, are the bane of the residential landscape, because basically each one of us is planting, a buffet, a well-maintained, well-watered, well taken care of, delicious buffet, and they thrive in those conditions. If you're concerned, especially if you have slopes, and that's where they really can actually be dangerous, contact the County of Los Angeles. The County of Los Angeles, I believe they do have a rodent control program. I don't think it's free, but I also don't think it's super expensive. And the County of Los Angeles, being the enforcement agency for the use of pesticides and things like that, if you're dealing with them, you know that it's going to be done safely and correctly. Unfortunately, most of the products that you can buy yourself at like the big box stores, the gopher bombs and the gopher poisons and things like that, they really don't work all that well. I don't like the gopher poisons at all because of the chance of what we call secondary kill, which means, yes, you may poison the gopher or the ground squirrel, but the chances are it's going to come out of its burrow when it dies. And then if it's found by a cat or a dog or a coyote or a hawk, that poison can actually transfer into that other animal, and you can get what we call secondary kill. So I really dislike the poisonous baits. Probably the most effective method is trapping, using the traps down in the tunnels. I'm not a big fan of that either, but they are relatively effective. They're a challenge. They really are. They're a big challenge. I wish I had better ideas for you. Okay, so we've chosen our plants, and now we want to put them in the ground. And this is a very important part of the process, and one that I see done wrong even by the professionals. You'll notice I named this this slide the $100 hole. And that's because we have a saying in the landscape industry that you put a $20 plant in a $100 hole. That's how important the hole is to the survival of the plant. And you'll notice in my drawing there that we don't follow the wives' tale. There's a wives' tale out there that says when you dig a hole for a plant, you dig it twice as deep as the root ball and you dig it twice as wide as the root ball. That's half correct. Twice as wide is the minimum you want to go for the root ball. You can't dig a hole too big for a plant as far as the width goes. It just becomes a matter of practicality. The wider the hole, the better. The depth is absolutely critical. And for the most part, people are digging their holes way too deep. And then the plant sinks into that hole. And over time, debris and mud and things flow back into that hole. That hole begins to fill up. And what happens is all that material settles around the base of the plant and it damages it, if not kills it. It'll actually, what we call girdle the plant, where it'll rot out the top of the root ball. And I'll show you an example of that here in just a minute. So the critical idea is dig your hole as wide as you feel like digging it. Dig it at least twice the size of the root ball. Go a little bit less. If you have to, get a tape measure and measure how deep the soil is, not how deep the pot is, but where is the soil level inside that pot. And dig your hole a little bit less than that. So you can see in my picture, the root crown, or the part where the trunk of the tree meets the soil, is actually a little bit higher than all the areas around it. That's what you want. You want your plant to sit up a little bit out of the ground. Anywhere from an inch on smaller plants like 1 gallons and 5 gallons to on a 15-gallon, you might have it up at 2 or 2.5 inches. On a 24-inch box tree, maybe 3 inches. So the bigger the plant, the more out of the ground you want it. You want a little bit proud of the soil around it. Let's see. Oh, the other thing I see people do is they get in there and they stomp the soil down around the root. They dig this beautiful hole, they put their plant in, they backfill it, and then they get in there and they stomp and tramp and compact as hard as they can that soil around the root ball. Don't do that. You want to encourage the roots to develop and grow out into that soil. And compacting it down like that is going to inhibit that. You do need to tamp it within reason to try to get the air bubbles out, the air pockets out of the soil. But that's it. That's all you're trying to do, is make sure there are no large air pockets around the root ball. Again, tamping that soil down so tight, when you go to water it, the water is going to just run off. It's not going to be able to infiltrate that soil. So don't go crazy with tamping the soil around the new plant that you put in the ground. And then install a berm, and I'll show you a picture of that here in just a minute. Okay, next slide. There we go. So I was talking about hand watering natives. This applies to that, but this also applies to any of the new plants you put in the ground. You've got that plant sitting up a little bit above the soil area around it, and you've built a berm around it so that when you water, you actually can fill that berm and walk away, and you won't have any runoff, and that water can naturally percolate at deep water the roots of that plant. So that's an ideal situation, even if you're using drip, because what you're going to find that with drip is that at least to start the plants off, you're going to want to hand water them. Even with a drip irrigation system, you're going to want to go back and deep water this way with the hose just to get them started off. And it's absolutely critical that when you get plants, you make sure that if you're going to put them in the day that you buy them from the nursery, make sure the nursery watered them that morning or the night before, day before, and then make sure they get watered the day they go in the ground. They don't have to be watered immediately. It's not like you put a plant in the ground and water it and then go put another plant in the ground and water it. It's just at the end of the day, after you've finished planting whatever you're going to put in the ground that day, make sure it gets deep watered. It's absolutely critical to help it through that transplant stress. We're going to talk about mulching. The mulch goes on the outside of the berm. Don't ever put any mulch inside that berm, because what's going to happen is it's just going to float up in the water, and then when the water sinks into the ground, that mulch is going to settle down around the base of that plant up against the stem or the trunk, and that's bad for it. So just keep your mulch on the outside of the berm. All right. A little bit about mulch. I really prefer plant-based mulch. Wood chips are my absolute favorite. You see in the picture with the red gloves how coarse and chunky that is. I think that's absolutely perfect. The finer it's ground, while it's more aesthetically pleasing like you have in the picture next to it, that floats in water, it blows in the wind, and it's going to break down very, very fast. It's going to decompose very, very fast, which means you're going to have to keep reapplying it. If you go with that nice big chunky stuff, like the city of Pasadena gives away, and we've got a flyer for that program here at the end of this program. If you go with that nice, really chunky stuff, it lasts a long time. You probably only have to put it down maybe once a year. Now, Tim being cheap like he is, if I put down that real chunky stuff and it's not aesthetically pleasing, I'll go back and put maybe an inch over the top of it of something that I like. Some higher end, maybe mulch that I purchase. No one's ever going to know that you didn't put down 4 inches of the good stuff. All they're going to see is that on the very top and make the assumption that, wow, this guy's really a high roller. So feel free, put down the free stuff and then put a layer of the good stuff over the top. You're going to want to go anywhere between 3 to 4 inches. If you put it down 3 to 4 inches in the springtime, you'll only have to do it once a year. And it'll take you through the whole year. By the end of the summer, fall, the mulch is going to start getting thin. That's okay. We don't need it to hold as much moisture in the soil as we do in the summertime. And the fact that it's breaking down means it's returning all those nutrients to the soil, like we talked about earlier in the presentation. It's actually a really good thing that it's doing that. A good mulch program, you figure once a year you go through, put a layer of mulch down, and you're done. Embrace the donut. What I'm talking about there is, and I see this happening commercially all the time, where the mulch is actually piled up against the base of the plant. And what it's doing is it's holding moisture against the trunk or the stem. And that will cause rot. It will cause the plant to rot out and then eventually die. So what you really want is you want to put your mulch on like a donut so that in the center, there's actually a hole. There's a space between the mulch and the trunk of the tree or the stem of the plant. Minimum 6 inches. The bigger the plant, the bigger that space can be. If I was going to put mulch down around a mature oak tree, I'd probably leave 3 feet between the inside of the mulch circle and the trunk of the tree. Just don't pile it against the base. Next slide. There's the mulch giveaway program. The dates are listed there. They put it in Robinson Park and Victory Park in the parking lots. They dump it, and for what the kind of landscaping we're talking about, it works great. A real quick aside, there's a little bit of controversy about using mulch with California natives. I would still use it. I wouldn't put it on as thick, but I would still use it. I would certainly make sure it's pulled away from the base of the plants. But remember, I was saying earlier that we have a real problem with our urban soils being so sterile because we've stripped off so much of the organic material, keeping the landscapes clean. You have to realize that out in nature, those plants are going through that nutrient cycle, like I talked about. It's not like the plants are necessarily growing in soils that don't have any nutrients or don't have any organic material in them. It's just they're growing in soils where it has happened naturally over time. And one of the adaptations of California natives is they have very low nutrient requirements. I mean, they still require some, but not nearly what some of the other ornamental plants require. So I would say mulch on natives, go minimally, but use it. Unless you have a really rich soil in your landscape already. Okay, next slide. So mulch damage. You see Homer there eating a donut. Right above his head, if you notice the discolored bark at the base of that tree, that was discolored by mulch being placed up against it, and the bark was damaged. The next slide over where it says volcano damage, that goes back to the picture I showed you where they actually piled the mulch up against the base of the tree to the point where it eventually rotted the tree out and the tree fell over. So it can happen. It's a slow process. It happens over time, but it can happen. It will happen, and it's totally avoidable by just applying the mulch properly. Okay, next slide.
Hi, Tim. I know that Jessica and Ursula are in the office and they have lost power. Can get back to where we were, and luckily, yeah, the presentation is almost at an end. So we did we almost made it here. Yeah, they're testing, of course, of all the nights, they're testing the fire alarm system in our office. And Ursula and Jessica are in the office. They were facilitating this workshop. So I'm luckily at home, so I can proceed.
Oh,
Well,
okay. So actually, we are at the end. The last
yes,
few slides, Kristen, I'll let you take the last few slides if you want.
yes. Let me just message them. So yeah, here we have one of one of many great resources that Pasadena and Water Power has to offer is this Water Smart Landscaping Guide. Now, it is on our website, and the direct website link is at the bottom, pasadena.watersavingplants.com. I've also included the QR code, so anyone can just hold their phone over that QR code and the link will come right up. I'm not sure. I'm not going to go into it right now just for the sake of time, but the landscaping guide is an incredible, it's more of a customizable landscape guide. So you can go in and it talks about all the different landscaping practices that Tim has discussed and gone over, as well as different landscape palettes. So they have a Mediterranean palette, a Southwest palette, a California native palette, and all things just more of a temperate climate zone, plants that do well in our climate. So this is a guide that is great for anybody that's thinking about transforming their landscape, adding to their already transformed landscape, and just some really helpful information. So we encourage you all to visit our landscaping guide on our website. And I also wanted to touch on our one of the programs that we've offered this month is a really fun one that's new, and it's called the Garden Show and Tell. So what we have here are residents in Pasadena that have transformed their landscapes in a number of different ways, and they're sharing their photos with us so we can be inspired and know that our community is doing something about it, and also just to get some really great ideas. So this is also on our website. We've been getting submissions all through the month of May, and we will be continuing this program next May because May is Water Awareness Month. So anybody who participates in our program and submits photos of their landscape transformation in the month of May receives a free native plant. So it's a really wonderful program. We've had so many people just really excited to share their gardens. You know, it takes a lot of work, a lot of dedication, and people are really proud of the work that they've done, as they should be. So we have just some really wonderful examples of landscape transformations here. As you can see, there's the before, the after, and the maturing. Again,
And by the
another,
way, there's nothing wrong with stealing a good idea. If you see an idea in somebody else's landscape, incorporate it into yours. There's absolutely nothing wrong with copying a good idea. Landscape architects do it all the time.
that's a great point. And I'm sure everybody would, that's the reason why all of these participants are happy to share their gardens, their photos, and And I've spoken with a lot of these customers when I, am attending landscape surveys or delivering drip irrigation kits, and they're so happy to share their story. Everybody is just wants to contribute, and they some I've just gotten some really great tips from people on how they've transformed their landscapes. The last slide here is one that we also shared at the beginning. And this slide is showing all of the water savings rebates and resources that we have to offer. So again, there is a QR code, and our website is pwpweb.com/savewater. And here you will find all of our rebates, most of which Tim has touched upon tonight in some way or another. So whether or not you're able to remove turf or remove part of it, plant different plants, switch to drip irrigation, you can get a low flush toilet or a clothes washer rebate. We can participate in the home improvement program. We have soil moisture sensor rebates and sprinkler rebates. To more efficiently water your lawn and remove the overspray that occurs. So please log on to the website, check out some of our programs. If you have any questions, you may email us at water@cityofpasadena.net. And we'd be more than happy to share information with you, however that needs to be done. And we do have time for a few more questions if we do have any. I see if some things in the chat here. We also have some great resources. The website that I just touched on, which is the pwpweb.com Save Water, and then pwp.com The Ripple Effect, which is a new campaign we launched at the beginning of the month, and we've been advertising it throughout town. So a lot of people are getting familiar with our new campaign. So we've also added the web link, as Tim mentioned, for the California Native Plant Society there. And again, our direct website email address is water@cityofpasadena.net. So let's see, I'm going to open it up and see if there's any questions here that we can answer. So
And
I don't know if
Kristen, I
anybody...
think we have a couple in the chat. I think I saw one question come in from Jim.
Okay. Jim says, how do we recover a planting in which we made all the mistakes mentioned in this talk?
You know what? Don't be distraught. Okay. I would say make the best of it. Really, the whole idea behind what we talked about tonight is saving water. And if you're saving water, then you've accomplished at least part of your goal. If you've made mistakes like choosing the wrong plants, as much as it might hurt to take them out, it's something you should consider doing because it's only going to become a bigger problem in the future. Now, having said that, you might be able to transplant them. If I was going to transplant anything, I think I would leave it in the ground now through the summer and do it in the fall. California natives are not real tolerant of that, so don't be surprised if you don't have some mortality. But move ahead, keep moving ahead step by step, figure out what you can use, what you can save, and then put together a plan for, fixing the things that you now see as being a problem. And, remember they're plants, so they're not going to get any smaller. That problem isn't going to get any smaller. It's only going to continue to grow. So you're better off dealing with it sooner as opposed to later. And I know that's probably not the answer that you wanted to hear, but it's probably not as dire as you think it is. Go out and do a good hard look and kind of think about what we talked about tonight and see, okay, what is okay and what should be changed. and then kind of put together a plan for doing that. Aim for the fall. Don't feel you have to make any changes immediately, because nothing's going to grow so much over the summer that it's going to be a problem between now and October. And October really is the best month to plant here in Southern California. So kind of aim for October as being the time frame as to when you make your changes.
Kristen, I saw that there's an earlier question. I'm not sure if it was addressed. Naki had asked how often do water natives that are not established in the summer? Did you say 1 to 2 times per month for established natives?
For established, yeah, for natives that are not established, I mean, as in they've just been put in the ground, they haven't been in for 2 summers yet. You're probably looking at maybe once every 5 to 7 days when we get into the real heat of the summer, meaning generally that's mid-July through mid-September is when we really have our hottest times of the year. And that's when they're going to require the most amount of water. You got to remember, when these natives are coming out of nurseries where they're typically grown in very, very sandy soils, and they're watered quite often. But because the soil is so sandy, it doesn't stay wet. So they're used to getting water quite frequently. Now, when we put them in the ground, you're not going to have that as sandy a soil. The soil is going to hold the moisture, which is why we have to start cutting back on how often we do it. But don't be surprised if, every 5 to 7 days on newly planted natives. In the first 2 summers anyway, the hottest part of the first 2 summers.
And then we have one more question here is, what is the average water bill savings after removing grass?
I don't have a number for that. Do you have a number for that, Ursula?
I don't, but I would estimate that if they're going to move, I think it depends on whether they also retrofit to drip, but I would say if they remove their irrigation, retrofit to drip, and put in drought tolerant and natives, they're going to see substantial water savings. And I would estimate that it's going to be over at least a 50% reduction.
I would agree. I would say in the 50% range at a minimum, and it'll grow. Or remember, as those plants become established and require less water into the future, what might start out as a 50% savings might end up being a 70 or 75% savings in the long run. A good idea to just a real ballpark way to figure out how much water is going onto your landscape is compare a January water bill to, say, an August water bill. Because typically we don't use any, or absolutely minimal amounts of water in our landscape in January and February. And so the difference between those 2 bills is usually the amount of water that's being applied outside to the landscape. So if you're kind of get a very general ballpark idea as to how much water you are using in the landscape, comparing those 2 bills will give you a feel for it anyway. Any other questions?
I don't see any more questions. So with that, I believe this is the end of our presentation. Tim, thank you so much.
Well, thanks to everybody that came tonight. And
Yes,
yeah, I
thank you
really
all.
appreciate you taking the time.
Yes, we really do. We really appreciate you all taking the time to join us this evening. And please reach out to us if we can assist you and answer any more questions. Our email is water@cityofpasadena.net. And we encourage you to check out some of our rebates and programs on our website. And we look forward to seeing you all out in the community soon. Okay, have a great night. Bye-bye.